Chapter 73. White Gouda was very glad that he had come late because of the pain in his butt. He had thought that these members of the church would not come again tonight after the gathering last night, so he wanted to come and see if the statue had been desecrated by the perverted gentleman last night. He did not expect that not only did the members of the church come, but also so many of them. Their posture of prostrating on the ground was so humble that it set off the nobility of the goddess even more. It was not the first time that White had seen their gathering. He only felt that he was different from them. It was a difference in sequence. This gave him a sense of uniqueness. But now was not the time to stay. From his point of view, he could not see the eyes of the goddess, but only felt that the statue was more sacred. He quietly retreated. Remember the URL. VIP can't you? 6. Although the cracks on the statue had increased, there were tinkers to repair them. He did not need to worry. It was just that he had to avoid this point in the future. The Shangmalian life between classes was still boring with a hint of fun. The news that the princesses of the kingdom were going to attend the masquerade ball spread like wildfire, setting off a great wave of excitement in this dull life. The students began to discuss excitedly. It was not just the first-year students. It was the whole castle that was boiling. The eldest princess, Anchi, was the most powerful competitor for the throne like the prince. She was widely loved both in terms of appearance and virtue. It was no exaggeration. More than half of the boys in the castle were admirers of her. Of course, adoration and love were different words. The scheduled participation of the princesses directly raised the level of the masquerade ball on Christmas Eve. The students, who originally only regarded it as an annual event, gradually had different ideas. The boys would want to dress more formally and be more handsome. The girls wanted to make themselves more beautiful, preferably to compete with the princesses. The masquerade ball was a special event. Even civilians could wear princesses' dresses without being blamed. Everyone wanted to be a princess. What's more, there would be a real princess present. Childish. Ai Ma complained in a low voice while carefully choosing a cute hair clip. It was said that the beauty shop opened by the elves had a plant essence that could temporarily straighten hair. She did not hate her fluffy curls, but sometimes she wanted to try another style. It was Friday in the second week of October. The little mages had more credits to spare, and at the same time, they had the title of core material for preparing magical elven cards. Therefore, Traveler's Street was unusually lively this weekend. First-year students could be seen everywhere. White's butt finally stopped hurting. He and Luo Boat strolled around the 10 school branch, hoping to find some cheap and special materials. White was deducted 50 points for using Forbidden Love on the back of Professor Kazair's head. Although Luo Boat was the victim, he was also deducted 10 points because of his night out. He kept complaining that Professor Shi Erfu was really boring and that Sister Kulyen was better. At the same time, Dake also came to Traveler's Street. He added some things that Catgrass liked and thought about what materials he would use to make the magic elven card for Monday's magician class. He was tired of the catnip's fur and wanted to try something new. For example, a combination of rat fur and thunderstruck wood. He heard that there was a type of magical elven called lightning rat. Although it was only 2 stars, it was extremely fast and was most suitable for dodging attacks by holding onto a magic ball in a duel. For a little mage who still couldn't use magic to control a magic conducting ball from a distance, this was a magic conducting fairy with a rather high cost-performance ratio. In addition, the combination of color-changing shrimps and transparent mushrooms wasn't bad either. It was said that there was a good chance of making a magical elven with invisibility. This kind of visual suppression was undoubtedly what little mages who didn't have the corresponding methods were most afraid of. As the number of magical elven cards increased, it was very likely that there would be first-year students who would be qualified to join the duel club before Christmas. Participating in duels was the proper way to earn more credits. Dake was already preparing for this. He hoped to have at least one second-tier, 4 to 6 stars, magical elven card before then. Although using Nirvana 3, could help Ivan evolve into a 4-star moon Ivan. Its disobedience was too fatal. It couldn't be used in a proper duel. Sure enough, even the goddess, Sin, wasn't as good as his. Dake stepped into a material store. This material store was called Wind Traveler, and it was the most popular store among the lower-year students on Traveler Street. The first and second-year students didn't have enough credits, so they needed this kind of store. Dake looked at the dried lizards, dried rats, dried centipedes, dried scorpions. He felt that there was finally a bit of a wizard in this place. Some of these normal materials only cost a few credits, and the most expensive ones didn't exceed 100 credits. He thought for a bit and finally bought a black 100-year turtle shell, as well as some shards of magical armor. Whether or not he could use them was another matter, but he would just leave them for now. Since Moon Ivan couldn't fight, he needed a meat shield level magical elven card to form a battle strategy. For example, Luo Boat's Fantasy Beast Castle was a pretty good type. If he could get a higher star rating. Then, he took a flower card from the Wind Traveler's store owner with a strange expression. It was a bonus for reaching 100 credits. It seemed like the shops on Traveler Street were giving out flower cards again. Even if he didn't know the reason, this was undoubtedly great news. Dake's legs suddenly gained momentum, and his enthusiasm for shopping gradually increased. Candy store, flower store, jewelry store, clothing store. He had already walked half a circle before he knew it. Dake looked at the 8 flower cards in his hand, and couldn't help but be overjoyed. The sun was setting in the west, and the red clouds covered the sky. The streets of Traveler Street were lit up with colored lights. Dake's footsteps stopped in front of an antique store, and his gaze was firmly attracted to an antique on the stall, unable to look away. He had seen the appearance of that antique in a book when he was looking for a way to restrain the 7 great sins. The Iron Hook of Fate. Legend had it that in an extremely ancient era, there was a god who would cast down a fishing line from the heavens, and on the fishing line hung a hook of fate to fish. The god was the fisherman, and the man was the fish. The man who was caught by the hook would be taken to heaven. Even if the last line of the book said, "When the soul is hooked, it naturally goes to heaven." But Dake still had an impression of this hook. Other than the rust, the hook's appearance was exactly the same as what was recorded in the book. Of course, there were many similar imitations in this kind of antique store, and it was impossible to find one just based on the knowledge he had read in the book. He just felt that this thing, even if it was an imitation, was still very valuable. "Child, what have you taken a fancy to?" An old man with a face full of wrinkles walked out of the dark antique store, looking very kind. "Heartsuit looking for monthly votes. Looking for subscriptions. Heartsuit, there will be more updates. Thank you for subscribing." Chapter 74. Dake didn't hide it. In fact, he couldn't hide it. Someone who could open a shop on Traveler Street couldn't be simple. This old man might look benevolent, but once he left Traveler Street, he might be a ruthless character. Dake simply pointed at the hook and asked, "Grandpa, this isn't the legendary Hook of Fate, is it?" The old man stroked his long beard and said with a smile, "It's rare for you to recognize it at such a young age." "That's right, its original form is indeed the Hook of Fate. Yes, the one that hooks souls." Dake was puzzled. Original form. The old man nodded and picked up the rusty iron hook from the stall, wiping the dust off it. Then he said, "The reason why legends are legends is because they're illusory and unfathomable. If someone really took the real thing, how could it be worthy of the word legend? This hook was just made by people to imitate legends." Dake nodded ignorantly, and was a little curious. "Then, Grandpa, can it hook souls too?" The old man glanced at him and suddenly waved the hook forward. "Scare!" Dake subconsciously shrank his head, but the hook swung over from above. "Remember in 1 second. https://vipcanchu. VIP." The old man chuckled. "It can't hook, it can't hook. It can only hook away a little distracting thought." Distracting thought. Dake's mind stirred, and he couldn't help but listen carefully. the old man said. Come, I'll show you. By the way, what's your name? Dake. Dake, what about you? The old man nodded. Just call me John Sr. With that, he walked into the dim shop. Dake hesitated for a moment, but still followed. Old John did not light an oil lamp until he was inside. The light kept spreading, illuminating the entire shop. John Sr. took out something that looked like sandpaper from a drawer and waved it in front of Dake. Gold point paper. Then he rubbed his dotted gold finger on the hook for a while, and the old rust fell off with a clatter. By the time he stopped stroking, the hook of fate had already become brand new. Dake gasped in amazement. Watch carefully. Old John raised his eyebrows at Dake, then suddenly picked up the hook and poked it into his head. A hook. The front half of the hook turned into a shadow when it came into contact with the skin. Then, a transparent bubble was hooked out of his brain. John Sr. reached out and poked, and the bubble burst. Empty all distracting thoughts, this feels so good. He actually had a refreshed look on his face. Dake could not help but ask, it can draw out the thought matter in the brain? Old John nodded and threw the hook back to the stall. Old man, there's no guarantee of quality. Besides, you can't use it now. When you're in 5th grade, if this hook is still there, I'll sell it to you. Dake's lips twitched, but in the end he left the antique shop. In fact, he also knew that any high-level item that touched the brain required extremely strong ability to control. Just like how he only dared to use the safest, dragonfly skimming the water method, even though he had the magic brain dropper in his hand. This imitation of the hook of fate was very similar to the magic brain dropper, but the latter could only be hooked one drop at a time, while the former could hook a large lump. That was really too dangerous. It was fine if it was just to hook up distracting thoughts. If he really wanted to hook something deep, he was afraid that his entire brain would be hooked away. 5th grade. Dake couldn't help but think. Do I still need it in 5th grade? In the end, Dake replenished a few blank magic cards and materials for experiments, then left Traveler Street. He still had thoughts about the hook of fate, but only a little. When he walked into the castle, a drop of rain quietly dripped down. It was raining. How lucky! Dake looked back at the rain clouds gradually accumulating in the night sky and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. There were 2 days on the weekend. Dake either stayed in the common lounge or the library. Occasionally he would go to Traveler Street, mainly to collect flower cards. However, the new flower cards seemed to only be in one wave, and the sender seemed to have been emptied. He walked around again and only got 3 more cards. However, he wasn't discouraged. Since the flower cards had been distributed, then he could just ask the students to collect them when the time came. It was just that the flower cards always felt unstable and might lose their effectiveness at any time. After all, it wasn't the right way to use external objects. Dake spent most of his time in the library studying theoretical knowledge related to thinking. He found that his knowledge in this area was still too lacking. If he could study it more thoroughly, he might be able to use a more ingenious method to extract more major sins such as pride within a month. Unlike now, where they could only wait for the arrival of the next month. In the blink of an eye, it was the 3rd week of November. In the first class on Monday morning, Professor Shi-Erfu was still talking about the theoretical knowledge of sacrificial summoning. The students barely managed to hold on until the end of the class, and all of them suddenly became lively. Even Dake couldn't help but smile. The next class was Professor Ka-Zayer's Introduction to Magic. Under Professor Ka-Zayer's guidance, they would start making their second magic elf card in their lives. Of course, there were also people like Dake who had already made their second card. Aima Métis was one of them. When she was in the library, she would occasionally summon her second magic elf. It was a gold coin with wings, and its best skill was to act as a gold coin. 9:50 a.m. Professor Ka-Zayer came to the classroom a full 10 minutes early, but the classroom was already full of students. He looked at the enthusiastic students with satisfaction and clapped his hands at the door. Then 2 human-shaped muscle lumps walked in, carrying a big box. 3 people, give out the materials. After taking back the magic elf, Professor Kazair spoke. Ai Ma, who was always in the first row, stood up silently. The other two girls also smiled and followed. We'll also help. Nobody knew when it started, but Ai Ma's popularity had become better. I think that everyone here hasn't forgotten, right? Professor Kazair walked up to the podium after the bell rang. He was as gentle as ever. In this class, we'll practice the basic alchemy method together. Don't look down on it just because it's basic. You have to know that it will be the most common method for you to make magic elves for a long time to come. Now open the textbook and review the specific steps of the basic alchemy method with me. As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden cry from below the podium. Shouldn't we start making it immediately? Professor. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured on the little magisters when the primordial power erupted. The atmosphere in the classroom took a turn for the worse. But of course, Professor Kazair didn't care about them and continued with the class. After refreshing the platform for a few hours, he slept for an hour, ate a meal, and updated late. After 12 p.m., he counted the missing chapters. He had to work hard for the next month. 10,000 chapters every day. Thank you for subscribing. Chapter 75. This time there were still 2 10-credit blank magic cards in the material bag. But other than that, there was no clear division of the materials in the bag. The materials in each bag were slightly different, so the students had to measure them by themselves. After half an hour of revision, the class finally advanced to the practical stage. Dake was already familiar with the process, and the process was as smooth as flowing water. He did not pay attention to the others for the time being. Starting from the combination of elven honey and brain lobe essence, everything was easy. This time, in less than 30 minutes, he had already reached the last step of the basic random alchemy method. He activated alchemy formation number 1 and began to seriously add things into it. At this moment, Professor Kazair was already standing behind him. Deanna wanted to take a closer look, but she could only sneak a peek because of the professor's presence. In terms of probability, the closer the nature of the core material, the higher the success rate of the alchemy. Dake looked at the core materials in front of him and fell into a dilemma. Website. https://vipkanchu. Vibe this weekend in order to get the flower card. He had bought a lot of useless materials. In addition to the 100-year tortoise shell and magic armor fragments, there were also some shell bracelets, snake eyes, magic candies, giant worms, and other strange things. The light of alchemy formation number 1 was already flickering. Dake gritted his teeth. He did not expect the alchemy to succeed this time. Starting from the tortoise shell, he threw in almost all the core materials. Perhaps it was because most of the materials were useless, but the alchemy formation number 1 swallowed them all. However, when the light of the alchemy formation reached its limit and Dake was about to breathe a sigh of relief, Professor Kazair suddenly said, "Spit a mouthful of saliva in it." Dake, huh? Professor Kazair. Human saliva contains many kinds of substances. When there are too many core materials, adding a little saliva will have a catalytic effect on the alchemy. Dake looked at him strangely, but he still endured the awkwardness and spat a mouthful of saliva in it. Is this the unpopular knowledge of Professor Kazair? I love it. In short, after he swallowed the saliva, the light of the refining formation had an obvious change. After half a minute, all the materials were fused and absorbed, and then impurities began to be ejected from the surface of the card. Extract the essence and discard the dregs. This was the most important step of the basic, random, formation array. Dake had failed at this step the last time he'd used the cat's fur for crafting, causing the magic card to burn. This time, with all kinds of impurities being spat out, the radiance on the magic card became clearer, as if it was heading straight towards success. But soon, the magic card was drowned by more and more impurities. Dark looked at the pile of impurities that seemed to have appeared out of thin air, and 3 black lines appeared on his face. Worker lol. It stinks. Anna covered her nose and whispered. Rose, on the other hand, quietly turned her face to the window. Professor Kazair was already 2 meters away. The increasingly thick stench quickly attracted the attention of the entire classroom. Dake leaned back awkwardly, but he didn't leave. That guy is as fast as ever. Ai Ma pouted and was unwilling to give up. There was a big pile of ancient gold coins on the corner of her desk. Did he fail? Luo Boat asked with his mouth open. White shook his head. I don't know. On their desks were the treasures they had gotten from the 10 school branch. White had been observing Dake. From the pile of core materials that were worth at least a few hundred credits to the saliva at the end. He saw it all. Then he looked at his pile of treasures, and couldn't help but feel sad. The gap between them was always unknowingly created. 1 step slower and every step slower. If he continued to be satisfied with the status quo, the gap between them would only get bigger. It was like owing a debt, and the more one owed, the more one owed. White gritted his teeth and suddenly had a flash of inspiration. If the saliva works, then what about hair, nails, and other things? Of course, ordinary people's hair and nails wouldn't work. But White knew that he was special. Perhaps the bloodline of the hero could give him some inspiration. Just then, the magic card on Dake's desk finally stopped excreting. He held his breath and put the tweezers into the pile of impurities. He carefully picked up the magic card and put it under the tap to quickly wash it. As the surface stains were washed away, a corner of the magic card was gradually exposed. It was actually faintly emitting a golden halo. Dake's hand trembled and almost dropped the card. Even though he had used Bliss 3 to evolve Ibu-chan into an orange card with 3 skills, the truth was that he only had 2 blue cards with only 1 skill. Apart from the number of skills, the magic elf card itself also emitted a halo of the corresponding color, which could be directly identified by the naked eye. Gold naturally represented a gold card. With 4 skills, it was the nobleman of the magic elf card. Before the appearance of divine cards with divine power, they were directly called divine cards. Dark had never imagined that he would be able to refine real gold from a pile of jinkala. He couldn't wait to use gauze to clean off the last stains on the surface of the card. Finally, he could see the image of the magic elf on the card. A magic elf with a small yellow head emerged from the red shell. It looked like a small demon, but its limbs were like slime tentacles. There were a total of 8 holes in its shell that looked like a tortoise shell. The edges of the holes were white circular protrusions, and its head and limbs extended out from some of the holes. It looked very soft. It's a gold kettlebug. Professor Kazair's exclamation came from behind him. It seemed that kettlebug had also been copied, but shouldn't it be kettlebug turtle? Dake looked at kettlebug in surprise. This was a super meat shield that exceeded his expectations. Card name, Kettlebug. Type, Elf card. Level, ****. Race, Insect. Attribute, Rock. Magic, 900. Attack, 0. Defense, 2200. Killing move, Sturdy, equal strength, equal defense, power trick. We already have Ibu-chan, so what if we have another kettlebug? We're already used to it, isn't it? 3-star card, so what if it has 2200 defense? Isn't this the value that kettlebug should have? Madam of Bones 3-star attack 0 defense 2200. Guardian of the Giant Shield 4-star attack 100 defense 2600. 1000-year shield technique 5-star attack 0 defense 3000. It's very common. Therefore, Dake turned around and asked with an innocent face, Professor, is this a very rare magic elf? Chapter 76. The corner of the professor's mouth twitched, but he still explained. From the data on the interface, the kettlebug is indeed a very rare magic elf. Until now, no one has been able to figure out how to make it. Its rarity is mainly due to its high defense value of 2200. This is the limit of a first-tier magic elf. Dake nodded slightly. Under normal circumstances, A 3-star magic elf card's top attack and defense value should be 1,500. The textbook clearly recorded the top attack and defense values of each grade of magic elf. 1 star, 5,002 star, 1,003 star, 1,5004 star, 2,0005 star, 2,5006 star, 3,0007 star, 3,500. Remember the website, Vipkanchu. 6,8 star, 4,0009 star, 4,500. These top attack and defense values were achieved by giving up one of the values. But there were always a few exceptions. Kettlebug was one of them. As a 3-star magic elf, Kettlebug didn't just give up its attack. Its weakness was very obvious. Its extremely slow speed and its small size of 0.6 meters made it unable to be a qualified meat shield. So, although Kettlebug was rare, it wasn't very versatile. However, the card in Dark's hand was a golden kettle. Moreover, these 4 skills were very practical. Sturdy passive skill. The magic elf with this skill won't be killed in one hit. Equal power sharing. Use your superpower to add your own attack and the opponent's attack and then divide it equally. Equal defense. Use your superpower to add your own defense and the opponent's defense and then divide it equally. Power trick. Use your superpower to exchange your own attack and defense values. With these 4 skills, although Kettlebug couldn't be a qualified meat shield, it could be a qualified magic elf. In a regular duel, it would definitely be the enemy's nightmare. Of course, Dake couldn't reveal the skill information of Kettlebug. The magic elf card only showed the magic elf's magic power, attack and defense. The killing skills were all hidden. Although Professor Kazair was very curious, he didn't probe further. He smiled and said, "Dimming, the goddess of luck is really looking after you." Dake nodded. "I think so too." Naturally, Dake, as the first place, finished his practical lesson and began to observe other people's refining methods. It was probably because they had experience in making magic beasts that the little mages performed well in this class. Many of them had also successfully made magic elven cards. After Dake, the second to succeed was AI Ma. Since AI Ma didn't summon her fairy in class, Dake didn't know what the golden beast was. There were simply too many types of magic guide fairies, and many of them weren't even recorded in books. However, the most eye-catching thing in this lesson was still the hero's son. The completion of Victor's magic elf card was accompanied by an explosion. When everyone turned to look at him, he pulled out a complete magic card from the ashes with a blackened face. Probably because he couldn't wait to see what his magic elf looked like, he directly summoned it from the back of the classroom. It was a giant monster. The giant monster's back was straight, and its head almost reached the ceiling. The moment it appeared, it let out a terrifying roar as if it was venting its anger. "Wow!" White wiped the dirt off his face and looked up excitedly, revealing his snow-white teeth. "If I had this earlier in the secret tunnel, I wouldn't have." Luo Boat was confused. "White, what are you talking about?" "Nothing." White laughed. "Don't you think my monster is cool?" Luo Boat couldn't help but cover his nose. "I don't know if it's cool or not, but it doesn't look very smart." White said happily. "Isn't that what a monster is like? It has no brain, great strength and thick skin. But is it a weakness if it doesn't have a brain? It's fine as long as I have a brain." Luo Boat. "That makes sense." While the two were talking, Professor Kazair walked over. "God, how did you summon a monster in the classroom?" White hurriedly said, "I'll take it back now." However, the news that the hero's son had created a monster was already known by the whole class. The monster was a standard 3-star magic guide spirit. It had both offense and defense and could often be seen in the arena. This undoubtedly made White's name shine. Of course, compared to White's monster, Dake was more interested in Deanna's magic guide spirit. It was a brown bear of the earth. As expected of a member of the Bear of the Kingdom, she really had an affinity with bears. Deanna happily hugged her magic guide spirit card and turned around to show it off. Dake could only coax her back as if she was a child. On the other side, Luosi also finished her second creation before class ended. She successfully created her own magic guide spirit. It was a rabbit-type magic guide spirit like her fantasy beast, Snow Rabbit. It seemed to have a sure-kill healing skill. This class was an incomparably huge leap for the first years. Most of the first-year students had their first magic guide sprite that could appear in the competition. At the same time, after learning how to create a magic guide spirit, they could finally rely on their own ability to buy materials and create their own magic guide spirits. It could be said that from this moment onwards, they had truly entered the school of magic. What surprised Dake was that, after this afternoon's potioneering class, White and Luo Boat actually took the initiative to find him. They even invited him to a duel. Dake was astonished. Although he was familiar with the school rules and knew that the school supported formal duels between students, he still couldn't understand White's actions. Could it be that White evolved into the main character of a fantasy novel and found the unique rhythm of the main character of a fantasy novel? Increase strength, show off and slap face. Increase strength, show off and slap face. 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 With a strange expression, Dake asked, "Why?" But he didn't expect White to come prepared. He and Luo Boat looked at each other. As if gaining strength from his good friend's gaze, he said, "I know you haven't looked me in the eye since school started." Dake, "Huh?" White, "Don't deny it, I can feel your attitude towards me." Dake, "Oh." White, "But today, I'll definitely let you know that we're on the same level." Winky face Dake, "Then do you know the rules of duels between students?" White was puzzled. Fair, impartial and open. Dake couldn't help but want to cover his face. "You have to bet at least 100 credits. White, "Huh. So you didn't know anything and came here with a lot of passion. How could you not pay a price for a duel?" After the minimum update, I started to add more. I adjusted the bounty. Begging for monthly votes, begging for subscriptions. Thank you all for your rewards. Chapter 77. Wait a moment. White's expression changed, and she hurriedly pulled Luo Boat to a corner. Only then did the two of them take out their branch cards and input magic power to check the relevant regulations. Then White whispered, "What's going on, Luo Boat? Is there really such a thing? Is the school supporting spinach?" Luo Boat thought for a moment and said, "I'm not sure, but I think I've heard of a theory." White asked, "What theory?" Luo Boat lowered his voice as much as possible. "Our school seems to be the biggest supporter of spinach behind the duel. Werther. Hey, don't talk nonsense. If the professor hears you, he'll be mad. Hey, are we still going to continue? By the way, do you really think that you can increase Dake's favorability by showing your strength?" Luo Boat said seriously, "Of course. After all, Dake is the only son of a duke. He's born with a noble aura, and it's normal for him to be a little arrogant. Don't be fooled by how approachable he is when he talks to us. But in fact," White asked, "What do you mean?" Luo Boat said, "I heard this from my dad's friend. These kinds of people are actually arrogant. The reason why they appear to be amiable is because they don't put others in their eyes. They treat others like cats and dogs. Of course they won't be angry." White was surprised. "Is that true?" Luo Boat said affirmatively. "What else? How do you explain that after so many days, his favorability towards you hasn't increased or decreased and has been hovering around 45? White said, "That makes sense." Luo Boat said again, "So, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. As long as you show your strength, there's a chance. If you want to unlock the lock of 80 favorability, you have to pay a price." White asked, "Then what about credits?" Luo Boat said, "Sorry, I only have 68 credits." White. Dake leaned against the wall and waited for a while. He was actually looking forward to his duel with White. After all, the rhythm of increasing one's strength, acting tough and face-slapping was indeed satisfying. At the same time, he could test out Kettle's abilities. However, when White and Luo both returned, they both looked embarrassed. White held back for a long time before she finally said, "How about lending me 1 point? Borrow 1 point. Dake was stunned. "You guys only have 99 points. White scratched his head and said awkwardly, "Didn't I use up all the materials I bought?" "Wait a minute. Didn't you go to the 10 school branch to get your materials? But as the saying goes, life is hard, don't expose it." Dake's EQ wasn't that low. He said helplessly, "I'm not someone who won't even lend a single credit." But as soon as he said this, Victor's expression changed again. He said, "Wait a moment." Then he pulled Robert and ran back to the corner. White whispered, "Luo Boat, if we had borrowed credits from Dake back then, wouldn't it have been easy?" Luo Boat. "Ah." White. "For example, if I have 10 credits and someone wants to borrow 5 credits from me, I wouldn't be willing to lend it to them. But what if I have 1,000 credits? Luo Boat. "But we didn't even talk to him back then." White. "It's not like that. Just like your analogy, it's the same as giving some food to cats and dogs when we see them." Luo Boat. "White, promise me, don't be so humble, okay?" White. Luo Boat. "Actually, if we had borrowed money, we might have lost more, so don't worry about it." White. "Okay." After a while, White and Luo Boat came to Dake again. Dake originally wanted to say that borrowing credits from someone to duel with sounded a bit stupid, so why not set up another appointment tomorrow? But White put on an "I'm ready, let's do it" expression. Dake had no choice but to give him 1 credit. There were still people who borrowed money to give it away. What a weirdo. Dake said, "So where should we duel?" "A battle hall." White hurriedly waved his hand. "There are too many people there. How about a corner of the castle?" Dake nodded. "That's fine." And so, the 3 of them went directly to a corner on the first floor of the castle. There were too many corners like this in the castle that nobody cared about. Luo Boat said, "I'll be the referee. The duel will be a variant of the elite mode, and only 1 magic guide sprite can be used. If the magic guide sprite loses, it's your loss. With your school card as proof, the wager is 100 credits. Do either side have any objections?" No objections. X2 and so, the contract was established. The 3's school cards were recorded. Dake just happened to want to experiment with Kettle's ability, so he took it out. And White naturally had Troll in hand, so he was full of confidence. Although he had discussed it with Luo Boat and said that it didn't matter who won or lost, how could he really have such a cowardly idea? If it was a duel, then he had to win. The 2 of them pulled about 5 meters apart, each holding a magic guide sprite card in hand. Luo Boat suddenly shouted, "Countdown to battle, 3, 2, 1, start." They directly entered the battle stage. Dake and White's expressions changed almost at the same time. "In my name, magic guide summon. Come out, Kettle." Dake casually swiped, and it only took him 6 seconds to complete the normal summon. Kettle, which hadn't breathed fresh air since its birth, materialized as a small sprite that didn't look powerful at all. Roar. It was a little late. The troll summoned by White suddenly landed and roared at Kettle. The stench from its mouth distorted the space, as if there were ripples radiating. This troll, which was close to 4 meters tall, was also a 3-star magic guide sprite, but its attributes were very average and powerful. Card name, Troll. Type, Sprite card. Level, ****. Race, subhuman. Attribute, normal. Magic power, 1200. Attack, 1500. Defense, 1400. Ultimate skill, suicidal tackle. Its attack value reached the maximum of 3 stars under normal circumstances, and its magic power and defense weren't weak either. It was a regular sprite that had been thoroughly studied by the magisters in the competition. Regular didn't mean weak. On the contrary, it was undoubtedly a synonym for strong. It was precisely because it was strong enough and easy to use that it could frequently appear in duels. As a troll of the normal element, it had almost no weaknesses. It was an excellent choice to expand the number of cards in the deck. And its ultimate skill, Suicidal Tackle, could inflict heavy damage to the enemy at the cost of reducing its magic power by half. When the troll showed its unparalleled power, both White and Luoboat couldn't help but show an excited expression. "Go, troll!" Under White's command, the troll immediately moved its thick legs and stepped toward the ant-like Kettle. In just 2 or 3 steps, it was in front of Kettle. Then it raised its foot high and stomped down heavily. Boom! Smoke and dust rose. Did we win? Chapter 78. White watched excitedly. He didn't think the little red tortoise could withstand the monster's stomp. But 3 seconds later, the sluggish monster suddenly let out a blood-curdling screech. Under the gaze of the 3 humans, it suddenly raised its foot to cover its mouth and jumped up like a rabbit with 1 foot. Looking at its cold sweat and continuous screams, it seemed to be in real pain. In the center of its right foot, there was a blood-red ball-shaped dent. But Wahoo, who was stomped on, nonchalantly stuck its tentacle-like head out of the hole. Bzzzt. Roar. Provoked and humiliated, the monster's eyes gradually overflowed with a blood-red color. Thick and long veins bulged at the corners of its eyes. It looked at Wahoo with a strange expression. Website. https://vipcanchu. VIP without Victor's orders. The giant monster suddenly raised its extremely long arms and clenched its 2 gigantic fists tightly. Then it suddenly jumped and landed on the ground in an arch. Its upper body bent down and its 2 fists hammered down with all its might. Bang! Wahoo bounced up again. But it shrunk its shell very quickly. There wasn't even a scratch on its red tortoise shell. White and Luoboat had never seen such a degree of violence up close. Luoboat was already dumbstruck. He had completely forgotten his duty as a referee. White was a little better, but he was still too shocked to speak. The only thing he knew was that this was his monster. A strong, reliable, invincible monster. Bang! 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 The monster didn't stop. It hammered Wahoo again and again. Only Dake could see that the monster's palms were abnormally red and swollen. But it was completely different from its previous screams of pain. The monster seemed to have entered a slightly berserk state. In this slightly berserk state, it had obviously lost its sense of pain. It was doing useless things over and over again. The brave and invincible monster in White's eyes was just a little brain paralyzed in Dake's eyes. Wahoo was clearly so small and light. Its attack was still 0. Wouldn't it be better to throw it away? Why did it have to be hammered? But it was still a monster known for its stupidity. Could be pardoned. Dake watched calmly. He had learned from textbooks that the attack and defense values displayed on the magic elf card could be used as a reference, but only as a reference. Every magic guiding spirit had different attack and defense values according to its own condition, every part of its body, and every attack method. Wahoo, for example. Only its shell could reach the limit of 2,200. Its body was quite weak. Even if it was a shell, not every part of it had a defense of 2,200. Every powerful archmage knew the true situation of their own magic guiding fairies like the back of their hand, and were adept at displaying their most powerful points in battle. Now, under the attacks of the giant monster, the strength of Wahoo's defense was gradually revealed. After a full minute of continuous hammering, Wahoo was still unharmed. But the monster wasn't discouraged. Instead, it became even more berserk. "That's enough, monster. Use your hands and grab it." White, who was immersed in ecstasy, finally calmed down after a full minute. He hurriedly gave the best command he could think of. The monster heard the command and suddenly froze in place for half a second. Then, it opened its red and swollen palm and slammed it down. "Divide the power equally." Dake's voice finally sounded. Wahoo, who had been passively beaten for more than a minute, immediately opened its sharp eyes. When the monster's palm fell, the power between the two sides was completely divided. Then, Huhu raised one of its hands and successfully blocked the giant monster's attack. The scene froze at this moment. It felt like the monster was holding up the sky with one hand. The monster panted heavily, its face becoming more and more ferocious. Monster sacrificial. White saw that the monster didn't seem to be able to do anything to Huhu. He made a prompt decision and ordered it to use the sure kill skill, sacrificial impact. But this time, the monster suddenly turned its body and glared fiercely at its master with its blood-red eyes. The murderous aura was already leaking out uncontrollably. White felt a chill in his heart. His voice became sluggish, and the command was interrupted. Dake on the other side asked lightly, "God, does your monster have a berserk skill?" "Berserk? I don't think so. This is just a blue." White raised his hand. Suddenly his face changed dramatically. The monster magic card, which was originally emitting a blue glow, was now surrounded by a purple halo. And in the feedback information after he injected his magic power, there was the berserk skill. Not good. His heart suddenly skipped half a beat. The monster had already gone completely berserk. Roar. It opened its arms and its face was terrifying. Its bloody mouth suddenly opened, revealing a mouthful of jagged sharp fangs. Then it suddenly turned its head to look at Luo Boat, who was standing at the side of the field. Maybe it was the nature of creatures to bully the weak and fear the strong. Even if the monster had gone completely berserk, it still keenly targeted the weakest Luo Boat. Luo Boat probably couldn't have imagined that he was just standing outside the field as a referee, and that he would suffer such an unexpected disaster. His face was full of fear. He struggled to pull out his Fantasy Beast Fortress card from his card pack, but his lips were trembling. He couldn't even use the usual summoning skill. The monster didn't give him any extra time. The huge black shadow blocked Luo Boat's vision. His pupils dilated rapidly. He was completely intimidated by the monster's murderous aura after it went berserk. He couldn't even run away. "White!" He leaned against the wall, almost crying. "Luo Boat, don't be afraid. I'll take it back now." White hurriedly shook the monster magic card, trying to take the monster back into the card. But there was no response to his call. The monster waved its hand and grabbed Luo Boat in its hand. But just as it was about to throw Luo Boat out, someone caught its heel. It was a small kettle, but it lifted the monster's heel like it was lifting a car. The monster's body lost its balance, and in the process of leaning forward, it slammed into the wall. Luo Boat found that the fingers holding him had loosened, and hurriedly tried to escape. But he just happened to cross paths with Dake. Dake looked at the monster with great interest. It suddenly occurred to him that this couldn't be the story in the first Harry Potter book, where the three of them had formed a friendship. But he quickly shook his head. This should be a normal world, and there shouldn't be any plot inertia. Everyone's fate was in their own hands. It was very likely that this situation was just a small coincidence. Relying on the power trick, Kettle turned into a 2200 attack Hercules and grabbed the monster's toe. Thank you for subscribing. Looking for monthly votes. Heartsuit. Chapter 79. In reality, the monster only had 750 attack left. Even though it still had a huge body and an intimidating aura, it was nothing in front of Huahu's 2200 attack. Bzzz. With a roar, Huahu grabbed the monster's toe and threw it in a spiral, sending it crashing into the wall. Should it be said that this was indeed a Shangmalian castle? Even after such a terrifying impact, it was still intact. It only shook a little and some dust fell off. But the monster was already sprawled on the wall. Its head was the most heavily injured, and it was about to enter the berserk state. It could no longer resist White's card call and was forcefully recalled. At the same time, the faint light on Huahu's body quickly faded. Huahu had 4 skills. Apart from the passive skill Sturdy, Each skill cost 100 mana and lasted for a very short time. In addition, its total mana was only 900, and its skills also had cooldowns. Remember the URL. Vipkanshu. 6. This meant that under normal circumstances, Huahu could only throw one punch. But after all, it was only a 3-star magic elf that could be summoned normally. It was worthy of the title of Gold Card. Dake was very satisfied with Huahu's card call. But White's face was ashen. No one could have predicted that things would turn out this way. But White still felt guilty. He quickly ran to Luoboat's side and asked if he was hurt. Luoboat was lucky. Other than being shocked, he was fine. Dake saw Luoboat hugging White and almost crying. He shook his head and turned to leave. As for the bet, he wasn't actually a person who followed the school rules. But he had only taken a few steps when White stopped him. White clenched his teeth and insisted, "You win, but I'll win back next time." Dake nodded and said, "Good luck." White's expression froze, but he still swiped 100 points and said that he would pay back the 1 point he owed in the morning. When Dake left with his back to them, Luoboat quickly reminded White. White slowly took out Taboo Love and pointed it at the back of Dake's head. Dake's heart skipped a beat, but he pretended not to notice and gradually disappeared around the corner. "How was it?" Luoboat wiped his tears and asked. White showed him Taboo Love. It was still 45 points. Luoboat was shocked. Victor nodded with an ashen face but then said, "Maybe it's because I didn't perform well. Damn it, I can't even control my own magic guiding fairy. How can there be such trash?" Robert asked doubtfully, "Are you scolding yourself?" White. "Can you not say? So that's how it is." Dake turned and left after pausing around the corner for a while. White's real goal wasn't too different from what he'd guessed. Actually, when he thought about it carefully, it left him speechless. But to be able to easily discover that the back of his head was being peeped at showed that he had practiced his dark magic well, at least a lot faster than Professor Kazair's prediction. He believed that it wouldn't be long before he could completely master the secret method for condensing mental strength. When that time came, he wouldn't have to worry about being peeped at by Taboo Love. In fact, Taboo Love had very little effect on him. He only saw a little future threat from it. Since there was a way to peer into one's thoughts in this world, he had to guard against it. The dark magic was only a preliminary restraint. He would have to find a more powerful restraint later. After returning to the dormitory, Dake first tested the effects of the Big Sin series of cards on Kettle Pot. There were some effects, but apart from an obvious increase in the level of intelligence, there weren't any decisive changes in ability like Ibu's. Dake guessed that it had to do with the uniqueness of Illusory Magical Beast, Ibu. Not all magic guiding fairies had the ability to change like EV. Of course, it could also be that Kettle Pot wasn't compatible with Pride or Bliss, or it could simply be that Kettle Pot's transformation potential had already reached its peak. After Dake recorded the experimental data, he continued to study things on the level of thought. At about 8:30 in the evening, he suddenly stopped writing and drew a picture of Kettle Pot in his notebook. He also drew a few fruits next to Kettle Pot. Yes, no wonder I kept feeling like I was forgetting something. Kettle Pot is a type of fairy. Apart from battle, it also has a very important ability. The interior of its carapace, which is like a pot, can dissolve the stored fruit and ferment it into a sticky, delicious fruit juice. That kind of fruit juice even has the special ability to restore physical strength. Considering the uniqueness of the fruit itself, this world might not have fruit like the one in the dream world. But if we use other fruits instead, we might be able to ferment some pretty good fruit juice. Out of curiosity, Dake couldn't help but look at the large pile of fruits in the corner. Those were the fruits he bought to collect flower cards. He was just worried that he wouldn't be able to finish them all. Just right for an experiment. Since it was an experiment, of course, he couldn't just randomly stuff all the fruits into his brain. Dake divided the fruits into different categories. First were apples, then oranges, then pears. He bought these. Let's start with apples. Dake excitedly took out Kettlepot's magical card and performed a normal summon. There were 8 holes in Kettlepot's carapace. He could stuff the fruits into these 8 holes. If he couldn't stuff it in, then he would cut the fruit into pieces. Dake put the cut apple into one of the holes. Kettlepot, whose intelligence level had increased to 3.0, immediately twisted its body and rubbed against Dake's hand. Good boy. Dake comforted it. After Kettlepot understood what he meant, it retracted its body back into its carapace and quickly dissolved and fermented. In less than 5 minutes, the amount of 3 apples was successfully fermented into delicious apple juice. Dake thanked Kettlepot and temporarily put it back into the magical card. He replenished its magic while summoning the little devil beast. The little devil beast flew down from the bird's stand and looked at the 3 cups of apple juice on the table. This time it actually showed a drooling expression. As a familiar, it didn't actually need to eat. It only needed to return to the Academy card regularly to replenish its magic. Of course, as the other half of a digital beast, it did have the ability to eat. Pick a cup and drink it. Dake tempted it. The little fiendish magical beast lowered its head, moved closer to the nearest cup, and drank the entire cup of apple juice in one gulp. How is it? Dake was suddenly concerned. The little devil beast squinted its eyes and savored it carefully. After a while it said, "Does my head feel better?" In short, it was confirmed that it wasn't poisonous. Dake also picked up a cup and savored it carefully. Then, his brain that had become tired from reading for a long time actually became active again. Is it good for the brain? This is like an apple. It's time for the 5th watch, looking for monthly votes, looking for follow-up orders, Heartsuit. Chapter 80. Apples had high nutritional value and were rich in minerals and vitamins. They were mild, sweet, and slightly sour. They could stimulate saliva and quench thirst, clear away heat, and improve digestion. Of course, there was also a weak effect of nourishing the brain, nourishing the blood, and calming the mind. However, after being converted by Kettle, this part of the effect was amplified. There were many magic potions with similar functions, but it was impossible to make such a delicious magic potion with just 1 apple. It was also at this time Dake suddenly realized that the kettle worm in this world might not have the ability to extract juice. Otherwise, the streets would be filled with juices. I'll find a chance to go to the library tomorrow and check it out. Dake continued his experiment. This time he used oranges. 3 oranges, 3 cups of orange juice. Remember, https://vipcanshu. The little fiend drank first as a sign of respect. Then its face turned green and it rushed into the toilet. There was the sound of water, and when it came out again, it was refreshed. Dake did not touch the other 2 cups of orange juice. Finally, he picked 3 pears and put them into Kettle's shell to quickly dissolve and ferment them. The 3 cups of pear juice that he obtained smelled sweet and refreshing. Without Dake's order, the little fiend drank one of the cups in one gulp. Then, it suddenly narrowed its eyes and stood still for a long time. Dake asked, "How is it?" The little fiend said, "It's getting cold, this society." Dake was speechless. He picked up a cup of pear juice and took a sip. He did feel that his throat was a little cold and there was a strange refreshing feeling in his lungs. Clearing heat, stopping coughing and moistening the lungs. Tastes like rock sugar and pear. So Dake wrote in his notebook, "Apple juice nourishes the brain and refreshes the mind. Orange juice stimulates the appetite. Pear juice reduces heat and clears the lungs. Why does it feel like an old Chinese doctor?" After Dake finished writing, he was amused. Kettle's ability was indeed powerful. It could ferment all kinds of fruits into juice with special effects. However, the fruits used in the experiment were all ordinary fruits. The special effects extracted were not particularly strong. This weekend, He could go to Traveler Street and pick some fruits with special effects to ferment. Perhaps he could get some fruit juice that was comparable to a magic potion. In addition, the fruit that the cat grass was about to bear could also be fermented. These were all points that could be considered. After concluding, Dark nodded his head in satisfaction. Then he looked at the remaining 4 cups of fruit juice. It seems that Luo Si said that he has indigestion. Maybe it's because he ate too much beef with Deanna. Yes, Deanna gets sleepy when she reads at night, and she gets heaty when she eats too much beef. 2 cups for each of us. Dake didn't think too much about it. He found a plate and went out with 4 glasses of juice. Deanna's room was 233, and Luo Si's room was 234. They were easy to remember. It was Dake's first time entering the women's dormitory. He felt that even the floor was cleaner than the men's. Fortunately, it was already past 9 o'clock at night, and there was not a single person in the corridor. Dake arrived at room 233 first and knocked on the door. "Who is it?" A soft voice came from inside the room. "It's me." Dake stood outside the door and waited for a while before Deanna opened the door with a red face. She looked up at Dake and whispered, "It's so late. Why did you suddenly come here?" Dake smiled and moved the plate down. "I made a few extra glasses of juice." "Oh really?" Deanna twisted the corner of her nightgown with her fingers and moved back slightly, revealing a gap in the door. "Come in then. Is it appropriate?" Dake didn't want to go in, but since he was already here, he might as well take a seat. After all, they were close friends on campus. They were both dormitories of the same size, but Deanna's room was much narrower than Dake's. She must have used a lot of credits to decorate her room. Not only were the walls covered with pink wallpaper, but the corners and shelves of the room were also covered with teddy bears of various sizes. One of the black and white teddy bears with bows on its ears was particularly eye-catching. "Ah, isn't that Deanna's familiar?" Dake glanced at the panda familiar that was forced to wear a floral dress and suddenly felt that he was quite nice to this little monster. At least it didn't have to wear a dress. Dake put down the plate, picked up a glass of orange juice and apple juice, and moved it to the desk. There was also a half-completed exercise book on the desk. It seemed that Deanna was having a fierce battle with them just now. "Orange juice. It's good for the stomach, but don't drink too much." "Apple juice. It's refreshing. Drink some when you're sleepy." Deanna leaned over and sniffed, then returned the orange juice to Dake. "I don't need this." Dake. "Okay, that's true." Then Deanna picked up the apple juice and drank it. After a while, her eyes lit up and she suddenly felt a lot clearer. "It's here. It's here. I'm in the zone." Dake smiled. "Do you want pear juice? It's good for clearing heat." "Hee hee." Deanna rolled her eyes and pointed next door. "Give it to Luo Si. She's having a lot of heat." Dake nodded. "Then I'll go." Deanna. "Okay." Then Dake knocked on Luo Si's door again. Luo Si opened the door and stuck her head out. When she saw Dake, she invited him in. She was wearing a white nightgown. Her belly was slightly bulging and her lips were dry and cracked. Obviously, she had eaten too much beef and hadn't digested it yet. Dake left the orange juice and pear juice for her. After returning to the dormitory, Dake looked at the orange juice left by Luo Si and considered whether to drink it or not. In the end, he chose to drink it. Needless to say, after coming out of the bathroom, he felt a lot more refreshed. Apple juice and pear juice are good things. I can always have some in the future. The calendar turned over. During the dual class of the first period on Tuesday, Professor Cheong Si learned that the first-year students had created new magical fairies yesterday, so she selected a few students to demonstrate their skills on stage. With all kinds of new magical fairies, the battles between the students were much more interesting than when they only had fantasy beasts. Someone suggested that they hold an in-class competition like last time. However, Professor Cheong Si said that it wasn't time yet. Magical fairy cards were the biggest category among the 5 major categories of magical cards. The next in-class competition would be held after most of the students had created their first magic card or item card. As for the venue card and the mystic card, they were extremely advanced content. She didn't expect the first-year students to learn it in the first semester. After this class, White came as scheduled and returned the 1 credit that she owed to Dake yesterday. The hero's son was always enthusiastic when it came to returning the money. Dake accepted the 1 credit and thought about how to create a magic card or item card. Maybe I can use the fermented juice from kettle as the core material. Monthly votes. Chapter 81. There was no need to wait for the professors to teach. After Dake had an idea, he went straight to the library after the history of magic in the afternoon. Soon he found a book called Pierre Explains to You in Person. How to Refine Magic Potions into Magic Cards. Pierre was a very famous potion chemist in the history of magic. From his point of view, there was no magic potion that couldn't be refined into a magic card. This explanation book was as thick as 3 fingers, making people feel intimidated just by looking at it. Not to mention the first-year students. Even the senior students rarely had the courage to take it down from the bookshelf. After Dake took it down, he suddenly remembered that he still had a problem to solve. He temporarily put it on the table in the reading room and used his shoulder bag to occupy the space. He then continued to search through the bookshelf. Soon, he found an illustrated handbook about insects and flipped through it to the description of the kettlepot bug. The description in the book was relatively brief, but it roughly wrote down everything that should be written. The kettlepot bug was a rare magic fairy that didn't exist in this world. Could only be refined by chance. In fact, most of the kettlepot bug were white cards and had no skills. The rarer blue cards had at most the passive skill, sturdy. The first website was https://vipkanshu. VIP. There was no skill like power trick at all. The card name of the kettlepot bug was called kettlepot bug. It had a 1-word difference with Dake's kettlepot. Perhaps it was this 1-word difference that made these 2 magic fairies that looked exactly the same have different life forms. Coupled with the activation of the Big Sin series of magic cards, it led to the kettlepot having the special ability to ferment fruits into juice. In other words, his kettlepot was absolutely unique. After resolving the doubts in his heart, Dake returned to the reading room. He suddenly noticed that someone was flipping through the extremely long Pierre Explains to You in Person book in the seat he occupied. He walked over and tapped the table lightly. Cough, cough, cough. Emma raised her head and glanced at him. Then she quietly closed her book and returned to her seat. Dake pretended that nothing had happened and began to study. The beginning of the book explained the difference between magic potions and magic potions that had been refined into magic cards. After being refined into a magic card, the potion would be classified into a magic card and an item card according to the different forms, but the actual effect would not be too different. The existing magic potions were generally one-time use, and would be gone after drinking them. After being refined into a magic card, it became a reusable magic potion card. However, the drawback of the magic potion card was that its effects would be weakened and would not last long. For example, a potion that could restore 10 points of magic power per second after being refined into a potion card might only restore 10 points of magic power per use. The advantage of the magic potion card was that it was easy to use, easy to carry around, and could be used repeatedly. Of course, the more precious the potion, the more difficult it would be to refine it into a magic potion card. Without sufficient skill, one might lose everything. For an archmage, if they wanted to use magic potions in a duel, they had to refine the magic potion into a magic potion card. Learning how to make magic potion cards was something every mage had to go through. From that afternoon onwards, Dake began to read slowly and put other things aside for the time being. However, Deanna began to ask him for apple juice every day. Luo C, on the other hand, had developed a strong interest in pear juice. Apple juice could refresh the brain and was suitable as a learning drink. Moreover, it tasted good. Dake could understand why Deanna would ask him for apple juice. But what the hell was pear juice? He knew that it could reduce heat, but he could not be heaty every day, right? It was not until Luo told him that it could reduce heat, detoxify, and prevent pimples that he finally understood. But was it really effective? Dake expressed that he did not understand. There was a limit to what a person could do, so he did not continue to pursue it. In the blink of an eye, it was Friday. After the dual class in the morning, the students were looking forward to the trip to Traveler Street again. There was only a week left before Halloween, and more people began to care about their costumes for the masquerade ball. The upperclassmen were even contacting their partners for the ball. The Halloween ball was not as romantic as the Christmas ball, and there was also the usual ghost hunting activity. In the past, it was not very popular among couples. However, it was different this time. The princess of the kingdom was scheduled to attend, and the style of the ball had been raised from a strange masquerade event to another dimension. There were even students who announced on the spot that this time, they had to wear the most formal costumes and transform into the prince who was most compatible with the princess. The goal was to dance with the princess. As for how he was ridiculed by others, that was another matter altogether. In short, those funny and strange costumes were not as popular as last year. Instead, outfits such as the Vampire series, the Night series, the Palace series, and other outfits that could show off the beauty and temperament of the person wearing the costume became more popular. The male and female students also started to have other ideas because of the gradually romantic atmosphere. They began to look for a dance partner. The first-year students did not have the advanced awareness of the upperclassmen, and it would take a few more days for it to explode. At this time, Dake entered Traveler Street to look for suitable fruit ingredients. Traveler Street was filled with fruit shops, but they were really shops that sold pears and apples. Of course, he would also buy some apples and pears to bring back, but his main goal now was the fruits with special effects. For example, the legendary dragon saliva fruit. Just kidding. Even if there really was one, Dake couldn't afford it. He first went to the Wind Traveler material shop. But not long after, he walked out again. Wind Traveler did have all sorts of ingredients, but the only thing that was related to fruits was dried fruit. And it was known that dried fruit had no juice. After leaving the Wind Traveler, Dake strolled around the street for a while before entering the Goo Goo Bird flower and wood shop where he had previously bought the worm tree. Buying fruit from a flower and wood shop sounded very unreliable. However, in the golden autumn season, there were many flowers and trees in the shop that bore fruit. As the boss, the fat auntie clearly remembered the first-year student who could afford the worm tree. When Dake asked, she smiled and said, "I can sell it, but the fruit is part of the value of the flowers and trees. If you buy the fruit, won't my flowers and trees be hard to sell?" Dake also smiled and said, "But the fruit is ripe, so it has to be picked. I only need to buy one or two that are picked or dropped." Fat auntie, "That's not a lot. Maybe there isn't what you want." Dake, "I can take a look. Today, even if I die and am nailed to the coffin, I will write the remaining 3 chapters in the tomb. Before 6 p.m. Chapter 82. The fat auntie was obviously biased towards Dake. However, for a first-year student who was studious, polite, and had a cute and handsome face, how could he not be liked? She waved at Dake and walked to the counter. Dake came to the counter and saw her carrying a basket from below. The basket wasn't big and there were only 5 fruits in it. Dake didn't know much about plants, so he couldn't tell what kind of plants these fruits came from. However, it wasn't shameful to not know, but it was shameful to pretend to know. Therefore, he asked curiously, "Auntie, what kind of plants do these fruits come from and what are their effects?" The fat auntie reached into the basket and pulled 3 fruits together. She said, "These 3 are the fruits of the singing tree." The singing tree was a type of bonsai that could make a sound when the sun shone on it. It was said to be a green alarm clock that was very suitable to be kept in the dormitory. However, this was the first time Dake knew that the singing tree could produce fruits. He remembered the website, Vipkanshu. 6. The 3 fruits were only the size of a longan and looked like 3 large blueberries. However, what were the special effects of the singing tree's fruits? Could they make people learn how to growl? Dake raised his head and looked at the fat auntie. The fat auntie smiled and said, "You first-year students might not have learned that the singing tree's fruits are actually one of the core materials of the mute card. They can absorb sound waves." Dake thought about it and said, "That can't be right. If the singing tree's fruits can absorb sound waves, then wouldn't the singing tree be unable to make any sound after it grows fruits?" The fat auntie shook her head and said, "On the contrary, after it grows fruits, the singing tree's sound will become louder. It will absorb sound waves and store them before exploding again." Dake still didn't understand, but the fat auntie obviously didn't want to continue. She took out one of the remaining 2 fruits and placed it on the table. This fruit looked like a pineapple but was only the size of a palm. The fat auntie said, "This is the fruit of the spiral tree." Dake was confused and said, "Spiral tree? What kind of tree is that?" The fat auntie pointed at one of the small trees in the shop. Dake looked over. It was a strange little tree with a spiral trunk. Its leaves curled up like wind chimes, and as the wind blew, they emitted a chime-like sound. "So why don't you just call it the windchime tree?" The fat auntie said, "Applying the leaves of the spiral tree on the root of the ear can effectively prevent the symptoms of dizziness." Currently, the best-selling carsickness sticker was made with the leaves of the spiral tree as the main material. Its fruit, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. It can make people drunk even without wine, and make the world spin. Dake was instantly interested in the pineapple-like fruit. The fat auntie picked up the last fruit. It was a translucent fruit the size of a citrus. Upon closer inspection, one could even see the core of the fruit. The fat auntie said, "This is the fruit of the worm tree." Dake was shocked. "Can a worm tree bear fruit?" "Course," the fat auntie explained with a smile. "However, it requires a very special method to grow its fruit. Its fruit is very rare and can store a person's temporary memory. It can be released as long as a little magic is injected. It is a natural memory ball." There were 3 chirping tree fruits, 1 spiral tree fruit, and 1 worm tree fruit. There were a total of 5 fruits. Among them, the chirping tree fruit was the cheapest, only 10 credits each. The spiral tree fruit was slightly more expensive, 30 credits each. As for the worm tree fruit, its price was actually equivalent to half a worm tree. Although Dake had credits, he couldn't spend them recklessly. In the end, he didn't buy the worm tree fruit. Instead, he spent 60 credits on the other 4 fruits. The main reason was that he couldn't imagine what the fruit of the worm tree could do after being fermented into juice. If he wanted to store memories, wasn't there a worm tree planted there? Getting another fruit of the worm tree was really superfluous. On the other hand, the chirping tree fruit and the spiral tree fruit seemed to be quite useful. After leaving the cuckoo bird flower shop, Dake began to walk around again. There were many areas in Traveler Street that weren't open to first-year students. This was mainly because first-year students still didn't have a complete understanding of magic. If they were exposed to too many dangerous things, it would only be harmful. Dake walked around and finally found a magic potion shop. Not only did the magic potion shop sell ready-made magic potions, but it also sold some of the ingredients for making magic potions. Naturally, it involved fruits, herbs, and the like. Moreover, the fruits here were clearly priced and had detailed information written on them. Dake picked a few whitewood fruits and blue fruits. The whitewood fruit was one of the core ingredients for making healing plasters. The blue fruit was the raw material for making the magic recovery potion. In Professor Thompson's magic classes, Dake used the blue fruit to make the magic recovery potion and magic recovery potion. He even kept the potions made in those 2 classes in the dormitory. Once he learned how to make magic potions into magic cards, he would prioritize those 2 potions for experimentation. The whitewood fruit and the blue fruit were 20 credits each, which was a discounted price for students. He bought 5 of each. Dusk was approaching and the sky was slightly dark. Dake carried bags of various sizes and returned with a full load. There were many people around him who returned with a full load, but they were all loaded with candy, snacks, clothes, and jewelry. Of course, there were also people like Ai Ma, who let 2 poor otters help carry 2 piles of books. When Dake returned to the castle, he happened to meet Diana, who was full and ready to go shopping with Luo Si. Just as Dake opened his mouth, Diana quickly said, it's done, all the homework is done. Then it's fine. Dake watched their backs disappear into the distance like a kind old father. After returning to the dormitory, Dake sorted out a bunch of things and organized them for about half an hour before he summoned the kettle to ferment a cup of apple juice and took a sip. Slightly refreshed, Dake couldn't wait to take out the whistling tree fruit. There were a total of 4 fruits. Among them, the effects of the whitewood fruit and the blue fruit were predictable. Only the whistling tree fruit and the spiral tree fruit were still in suspense. He was curious about the effects of these 2 fruits if they were fermented into juice. Among them, there were 3 whistling tree fruits, which had more room for error. It was just right for the first experiment. In the end, a whistling tree fruit the size of a longan took a full 15 minutes to ferment. In order to complete the fermentation of the whistling tree fruit, Dake had to continuously replenish Kettle's magic. When he finally succeeded, he couldn't help but sigh in relief. Then he smiled and looked at the little devil that was about to sneak away. Chapter 83. A longan-sized singing tree fruit could only produce a small cup of juice after being dissolved and fermented. The juice was dark blue and didn't look like it could be drunk by humans. Fortunately, the little fiend wasn't human. Dake couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The little fiend was forced to fly back. It lowered its head and carefully took a sip of the juice in the small cup. There was a hint of sweetness. With this thought in mind, the little fiend unknowingly drank the entire cup of songshu fruit juice. How do you feel? The little fiend was very touched by Dake's late concern. It turned around and said. Dake couldn't help but wonder. What did you say? Little demonic beast. Remember in 1 second. https://m vipkanchu. VIP Dake. Oh. The little fiend. Dake. Why don't you say it? The little fiend. Dake. If you don't say it, how would I know what you want to say? The little fiend. In short, the little fiend couldn't make a sound. Dake, of course, immediately realized the problem. He glanced at the clock and noted the time. Without the little fiend, Dake obviously wouldn't do any random experiments. He picked a book and read for a while. It wasn't until the little fiend suddenly let out a "ah" sound that he got up to record the time. Will it last for about 8 minutes? Should I say that it's really one of the materials to make the mute card? SSS, if I use this juice according to the method of making the potion card, can I find another way to make a different mute card? As long as one was a first-year student, there wasn't a single person who wasn't envious of Professor Shi Erfu's mute card. That kind of boldness that could make everyone quiet down with a wave of his hand was just too cool. It was a pity that making the mute card was a skill that only seniors could learn. Whether it was the technical difficulty or the quality of the materials, the requirements were very high. Among the first-year students, even Dake was self-aware. He didn't even think about touching that level of refining. However, he seemed to have a chance now. With that thought in mind, Dake carefully stored the remaining 2 singing tree fruits away. Although the singing tree fruit wasn't expensive, most of the singing tree fruits that could be bought on Traveler Street were dried fruits that had been processed, unless one went to a florist's shop to try their luck. After that, Dake extravagantly took out a spiral fruit that cost 30 credits each for an experiment. The spiral fruit took about 15 minutes to ferment. Fortunately, Dake had mastered the mana replenishing technique, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to brew it. The juice of the spiral fruit tree had a strange black and white color. It would swirl with a slight stir. A spiral fruit finally fermented into a cup of juice. Seeing that there was only 1 cup of black and white juice, Dake thought for a moment before scooping a spoonful with a silver spoon and passing it to the little fiend. Dake. Ah! The little devil beast. Ah! A spoonful went down his stomach. The little demonic beast extended its claws and spiraled into the sky. Dake poked its belly and it giggled. Dake let out a sigh of relief and asked, "How is it? Are there any abnormalities?" The little devil beast. He. Dake. The little devil beast. He. Alright, this time it was the ears. Dake felt that he had discovered the secret of the spiral fruit tree. The little devil beast's hearing impediment lasted for about 2 minutes before it recovered. Dake confirmed the effects of the 2 tree juices and wrote in his notebook, "Singing tree juice. Unable to make a sound. Spiral tree juice. Hearing impediment. Drinking the 2 juices together is both deaf and mute." Dake looked at the cup of spiral tree juice and thought about how to preserve it. Apart from that, he couldn't help but think that if the 2 juices were mixed together, would the effects be lost? Or would it be both? Should I try again? He did as he thought. Dake took another singing tree fruit and let kettle dissolve and ferment it into juice. Then, he took a spoonful of both juices and put it into another small cup and mixed it carefully. After the black and white juices mixed with the dark blue juices, there was no color fusion. Instead, it presented a wonderful liquid of black, white, and blue. After being forced to take a bite, the little demon beast became a deaf-mute beast for real. The effects seemed to be stronger as it lasted for a full 5 minutes. Dake suddenly realized something. Then, he looked at the remaining amount of the 2 juices and fermented the last singing tree fruit into juice. This way he could try to achieve a 1:1 ratio. After that, he mixed the 2 juices, covered it with a lid and put it aside for the time being. It was already 8:30 at night. Dake knew that it was time to put what he had learned to use. Without a suitable preservation method, the shelf life of the 2 juices wouldn't be long. The best way was to use it while it was hot and directly make it into a magic potion card. Of course, he wasn't so bold as to use it for his first experiment of making a magic potion card. With the dried white fruit and the blue fruit, it wouldn't be their turn either. Anyway, the first step was to put the dried white fruit or the blue fruit into Kettle's shell. But at this moment Dake, who had just completed a small fusion, suddenly had some distracting thoughts. He put a dried white fruit and a blue fruit into Kettle's shell. The 2 fruits dissolved and fermented in the shell at the same time and finally formed a mixed liquid. Dake first used Pride Eye to make the little devil beast arrogant and let it use Small Dart to consume its magic power. Then, he scooped out a spoonful of the mixed juice and fed it. After absorbing this spoonful of mixed juice, the little devil beast did feel its magic power quickly recovering. As for the other half of the healing effect, it didn't show up yet. But this was enough for Dake. He didn't want to become a fatty in one bite. After that, he took out Pierre Personally Explains It to You and started experimenting step by step according to the method recorded in the book. There were many ways to make a magic potion card. If you had to break it down, every magic potion had a different way of making it. What Dake tried was naturally the common method recorded in the book. To be more precise, it was the common method of making mana recovery potion into a magic potion card. Imitating this method and replacing mana recovery potion with mixed juice was Dake's current idea. The creation of a magic potion card was completely different from the magic elven card. From the beginning, it didn't need elven honey, brain lobe essence, and other life cultivation bases. Its core was a type of refining array number 3 called the Dalton refining array. Dalton was a great grand mage, second only to Merlin, who created a new era of transforming magic potions into magic potion cards. Chapter 84. Apart from the core alchemy array number 3, the energy cycle combination of alchemy arrays number 21, number 33, and number 34 was basically used as the core to transform the magic potion into a magic potion card. The most common method of making it was to first pour the magic potion into the magic pen and use it as a pigment. When the sorcerer wrote the magic language on the blank magic card, they would use the most gentle method to gradually transform the surface nature of the blank magic card into the nature of the magic potion. This would achieve the final compatibility with the magic potion and greatly increase the success rate of making the magic potion. The so-called magic language belonged to the knowledge that would only be taught in the second year. It was a bit like computer language. Before the second year, the sorcerer could only copy the template to achieve the goal of making the magic potion. They could not wait until they had mastered the magic language, and then compile it in their own way. What Dake could do now was, of course, copy. 33 minutes later, Dake looked at the circle of light of the alchemy array on the magic card, and knew that he had successfully advanced to the final step. Thanks to his steady fingers and spirit, he had not made any mistakes in the steps of the drawing so far. The first website was https://vipkanshu VIP. The last step was to pour the magic potion into the circle of light formed by the alchemy array number 3. Up until now, the mixed juice made from one dried white fruit and one blue fruit each was only left with more than 1/2 and less than 2/3. He did not know if the mixed juice was enough, so he was a little nervous. But the facts showed that it did not even need that much. He only needed to pour 1/2 of the 2 cups of mixed juice into the alchemy array, and the final fusion began. At this step, external forces could no longer interfere. It relied entirely on the half-formed magic card to make the self-modulation. If the modulation was successful, it would be a success. If the modulation failed, there was a probability that it would turn into an inferior or mutated magic potion card. But most of them would still be a GG. The most direct visual manifestation at this time was the light of the alchemy array that kept flashing on the magic card. The whole process of making the magic potion only truly ended when the light completely subsided. Therefore he waited for about 3 minutes. Dake's breathing almost stopped when the self-modulation of the magic card was finally completed. He lowered his head to look at the surface of the magic card. Probably because the entire refining process was relatively perfect, the surface of the card was quite clean. Next to a round flask filled with potion, there was a test tube with blue and white liquid. It should be an item card, right? Dake frowned slightly. After refining a potion into a potion card, whether it was a magic card or an item card, the most direct indication was whether there was a container on the card surface. With a container, it belonged to the category of props. In the process of using the item cards, the magic guide fairies had to go through a process of taking. From this point of view, magic cards were more convenient. However, it was not as stable as item cards. It could only be said that each had its own pros and cons. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon you. At the same time, a bottle of blue and white magic potion appeared in the air. Card name: Energy Potion Type. Prop effect: restores 200 energy points after consumption. It wasn't a mana recovery potion, but an energy potion. The mana recovery potion card, which could restore 100 points of magic power, became an energy potion card, which could restore 200 points of magic power. In addition, after using it once, it also needed to replenish its magic power, or wait for it to restore its magic power to full before it could be used again. All in all, Dake was quite satisfied. Next, he still didn't make the mixed juice of the screeching tree fruit and the spiral tree fruit magic card. Instead, he made another energy potion to practice. After he was proficient enough, he changed to the most basic method of refining a potion into a potion card and began to try to make the deaf-mute potion. With the previous 2 practice sessions and time to drink a cup of apple juice, Dake finally succeeded in refining the deaf-mute potion. Card name: Mute Potion Type. Prop effect: after consumption, no sound can be heard and no sound can be made. Lasts for 120 seconds. In a duel, 120 seconds was more than enough. Dake seemed to be quite happy. The so-called consumption here could be taken orally or externally. Externally, it could be directly smashed on the opponent's body to take effect. One could imagine how pitiful and helpless the magic guide fairies would be after being smashed by the mute potion. Yes, just like the little evil magic beast now. However, the little evil magic beast had already learned the secret skill: lying dead. As long as it lay on the table and waited for the potion's effect to subside, it would be a good demon again. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Asterisk. The experiment was finally over. Dake summoned the trash slime to help deal with the residue of the experiment. After that, he washed his body and practiced the underworld magic on the bed for an hour before lying down to sleep. The next day, perhaps because he slept late last night, Dake felt a little tired. He climbed onto the deck chair on the balcony and watched the outfit changer while conserving his energy. Just like that, 2 hours passed. Dake was preparing to review and consolidate the experiment data from last night when there was a knock on the door. To him, this was a very rare occurrence. Since entering the school, there was really no one who had the ability to knock on the door. The main thing was that he always left one step ahead of others and didn't give them much of a chance. "Who is it?" "It's me, the lovely Deanna." "It's the gluttonous Deanna." Dake opened the door helplessly and saw Deanna and Luosi standing at the door. He asked, "What's the matter?" Deanna looked at him and invited, "Aren't you going to buy a costume for Halloween?" Luosi agreed, "It's time." Dake thought of his crudely made nightgown and nodded. There was only a little more than a week until Halloween, so it was time to prepare. He didn't want to be the laughingstock of the masquerade party. "Then let's go together." Deanna immediately showed a sunny smile. Dake suddenly felt a little dazzled, so he said, "Wait a minute, I'll go change." At around 8:30, the three entered Traveler's Street through the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Deanna curiously asked, "Dake, do you have a target in mind?" Dake, Deanna, I mean the costume you like." Dake thought for a while and said, "Just buy a decent dress?" Deanna nodded seriously. "The dress is also not bad. But I recommend the Prince of Darkness outfit from the Velvet store." Dake, "The Prince of Darkness is more like it. Forget about the Prince of Darkness." Deanna, Dake, "I'm kidding. Let's go and have a look." Reached the 5th update of the 2nd, please vote. Chapter 85. Saturday morning, people came and went. Keat walked among the crowd with a gloomy expression. He was a second-year student, and as a pure-blooded noble, he had been assigned to the noble house. But that was all in the past. Last year, on the 2nd month of his enrollment at the Shangmalian Academy, his family had fallen into a difficult situation due to his father's political defeat. From a noble to a lowly commoner, the huge psychological drop had caused Keat's heart to become twisted. The Shangmalian Academy would not rearrange students based on their family's circumstances. Keat had become his family's only hope. He had also become the only commoner in his year at the noble house. Even though his classmates never talked about it due to the etiquette of nobility, they must be laughing at him behind his back, right? With this thought in mind, Keat gradually stuffed himself into a cold, pitch-black leather jacket. He remembered the URL, VIP Kanchu. VIP. His father had frantically sent him letters through a clerk at Traveler's Street, allowing him to finally understand what kind of burden he was carrying on his young shoulders. Becoming a qualified magister could change his family's circumstances. Even if he wasn't a noble, he could still live a good life. If he could become an outstanding magister, he might even be able to return to the noble circle. His mother would always send her voice to him through magic letters, calling his name over and over again. Keat. 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 Keat collapsed under the double pressure of internal and external pressure. When one was young, the family's upheaval could indeed allow some people to grow up in an instant, but not every 12-year-old could bear such a heavy burden. Keat did not grow up according to his parents' expectations. Instead, he fell into a rut. His grades became worse and worse, and his temper became stranger and stranger. Until Christmas Eve last year, when the girl he had always had a crush on responded to an invitation from a senior and became his partner at a romantic ball. As a result, he escaped from the youthful scene and rushed into the deepest part of the castle. At that time, the person who had extended an olive branch to him was the leader of the church. Found him. See Keats' gaze pierced through the gaps between people and finally caught sight of the heretic who was hugging women in his left and right arms. Velvet clothing shop. Dake was pulled into the crowd by Deanna. He never would have thought that the shop's business would be so good before 9 o'clock. Perhaps this was the legendary reputable store. If he had come by himself, he would have definitely gone to another shop after seeing so many people. But in reality, most people like to squeeze into shops with more people. Perhaps it was because of a crowd mentality, or perhaps it was because they believe that a shop shops. Soon. Dark was pulled to a corner of the shop and stood in front of a mannequin. He could not help but ask, "The Prince of the Night Prince set?" Diana nodded her head like a chicken pecking at rice. But Dake's it was not that the quality of the Prince of the Night Prince was not good, but the quality was too good, to the point of exaggeration. The material was black velvet, the collar was made of Snow Mountain black fox fur, and there was a fluffy foxtail at the back. The 2 rows of buttons were made of obsidian, and there were even opals on the shoulders. Could the feather cape on the shoulders be the feather of the black raven? That was an ominous symbol of the night. Even though this set of clothing had different shades of black, it gave off a very high-class feeling. But in the end, it could not escape the fact that it was all black. If he walked on the stage of Christmas wearing such a costume, he would instantly become the focus of the stage. Dake did not want to be so eye-catching. And this, the half-face black raven mask. However, Diana excitedly pointed at the black raven mask that was studded with black diamonds on the table next to her. Dake could not help but be speechless. Is this thing for people to wear? Which country's prince would dare to dress like this? This is not a world derived from dating games. Dake thought of the only eldest prince of the kingdom. That guy did seem to have this style of dressing. So the people's aesthetic had been led astray by him. Dake's eyes flashed, and suddenly his eyes lit up as he found a reason to refuse. Hiss! He sucked in a breath of cold air. 399 credits. At this price, it seemed that the obsidian, opals, and black diamonds were all products of magical technology. But for a first-year student, it was still an unattainable price. I'd rather buy caterpillar fruit than buy this thing. Thinking of this, Dake prepared a speech and was about to open his mouth to refuse. But Deanna suddenly smiled proudly and pulled him in front of another model at the back. Look, the princess of the night suit. Dake's eyelids twitched. This black velvet princess dress on the female model was indeed worthy of the prince of the night suit of the same name. Not only was it full of all kinds of exaggerated decorations, but it was also full of frills, as if the more frills there were, the more princess-like it was. Dake was just about to open his mouth to say something. Deanna pointed at one of the labels. 50% discount for couples' outfits. Dake's eyelids twitched. Good girl, so this is what you were waiting for. On the other side, Luosi grinned as she picked a white sergeant's uniform and a peacock feather half-mask. She obviously knew what Deanna was up to. In the end, Dake bought the Prince of the Night suit. After a 50% discount, the 200 credit set was still within his acceptable range. And besides other things, the quality of the fabric of this suit was very high. After the boss of the clothing store cast a spell to shrink it, it was very comfortable to wear. If possible, he could even keep it until the Christmas ball. At that time he could also save a lot of money. After leaving the velvet clothing store, Dake, Deanna, and Luosi walked around the stores and finally came to a high-class restaurant. This restaurant was called Waltz, and was quite famous among the students. It mainly promoted a kind of style. Dake specially ordered the most expensive dessert ice cream for Deanna and Luosi, while he ordered a small cup of ice cream for himself. He was already very familiar with small tricks like this to restrain gluttony. The three of them enjoyed the sweet ice cream in the cool autumn, enjoying a completely different pleasure from summer. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, there were maple leaves falling in the wind and bustling crowds. The smell of youth was like a broken kite, floating higher and higher. Keat, who was leaning against a maple tree like an ancient detective, disguised herself with a newspaper. Her face turned green from the smell of youth, and her eyes overflowed with coldness like a poisonous snake. It's coming, a new day is coming. Please subscribe, please subscribe. Buzz buzz. Chapter 86. Dash! Yawn on the bridge. White and Luo both yawned as they entered Traveller Street. The two fought until the wee hours of the morning and barely got up at 9 in the morning. They didn't go to the cafeteria to eat and instead went to Traveller Street. In the 4 days after Monday, they did their best to listen to classes. Finally, they each saved enough credits and wanted to pick out a costume for the masquerade party on the weekend. In fact, Victor already had a Cayman Rider suit. But first of all, the masked knight suit was too crude, so he felt that he had been tricked by Lion Sr. Secondly, he had worn a masked knight costume in his confrontation with that perverted gentleman. In order to not expose his identity, he wanted to buy a better one. I heard that the 3 princesses will join the party in disguise. Whoever gets the favor of one of the princesses will be able to dance with that princess when the clock strikes 12. Luo both rambled as if he had nothing to say. White's eyelids drooped. Not interested. Luo both asked again. Do you know about the Halloween ghost hunt? White perked up. Of course I know. It's the best chance to get a lot of credits. With credits you can have everything. Luo both smiled mysteriously. Then you definitely don't know who was last year's third-year champion. White was stunned. Why specifically say third year? Wait, don't tell me that last year's third-year champion was Panduola. Luo both said proudly. That's right. Her name is clearly hanging in the Academy's prize showroom. How about it, are you motivated? White suddenly stood still. Luo both. Luo both. Yes. White. This year's first-year champion is ours. Then White, who was in high spirits, entered a famous velvet clothing store to make himself look more elegant. A few minutes later they ran away. Isn't this too expensive? If we use up all our credits, how are we going to buy materials to strengthen ourselves? How about we buy some next weekend? Maybe that's a good idea. I'm a bit hungry, White. Let's go find something to eat. Thus White and Luo both dejectedly walked to the street filled with restaurants. Inadvertently, the two of them passed by the Waltz Music Restaurant and saw Dark and the other two through the glass, as well as Diana and Rose's high-class ice cream. Gulp, Victor swallowed his saliva and whispered. Robert, how many credits did that chocolate strawberry honeydew melon triple cream top ice cream cost? Robert said, I think it's 19 credits. Victor. It's been 2 periods, quick. Luo both. Slurp, White. Let's wait until after Halloween. We'll definitely be able to afford it. Luo both. Actually, we can afford it now. White. Stop fooling around, we'll use the credits to buy materials. Luo both. Actually, I have a compromise. White. Huh. Keat, who was leaning against a maple tree, pretended to read the newspaper. She glanced at them and sneered. One of them was the hero's son, and the other was someone she had tied up. So you're the hero's son's follower. I thought he was a person who had nothing like me, so I showed him some mercy that night. If I had known earlier. Dake was eating ice cream in small bites. He was in a good mood today. Even though it was a little different from what he had planned, he still gained something. Diana and Luo C were eating ice cream and playing around. The corners of their mouths were gradually stained with cream. White and Luo both pushed open the door and entered. They ordered a 19-credit cup and 2 spoons from the counter. Dake was a little surprised to see the two of them, but he didn't pay them much attention. Dake, let's team up for Halloween. Deanna and Luo also talked about the masquerade party. Dake was puzzled. You can team up for the event. Course. Deanna stuck out her pink tongue and rolled up the white cream at the corner of her mouth. She whispered, I heard that senior students often do this. Teaming up can increase the efficiency of catching ghosts, and at the end of the awards, all the points will be given to one person to compete for the grade championship. Dake was stunned. Isn't that cheating? Deanna was confused. But everyone does it. Dake showed a gentle smile. Then, do you know how many grade championships have been won this way? Deanna used the handle of her spoon to support her dimples. After thinking for a while, she said, I don't think so. Dake. That's right. He lowered his head and ate a mouthful of ice cream. Then he said, this masquerade party can actually be seen as a trial. It can be used to test the results of the 2 months of school. If I team up with you, the effect of your trial will be greatly reduced. Deanna thought for a while and smiled. I'll listen to you. Around 10:30 p.m. Dake said goodbye to Deanna under her reluctant gaze. Then he walked past the brave duo and left the Waltz Music Restaurant. He was very interested in the ghost hunt on Halloween, but it was mainly for the credits. As for the grade championship, whoever wanted it could have it. A few minutes later, he walked out of the food street filled with restaurants and turned into an old and sparsely populated street. Not all areas of Traveler Street were popular. There were always some unpopular shops that no one cared about. The shops had to do business. If no one came, they would inevitably close. He had been here before he familiarized himself with the area, but this was the first time he had taken the initiative to come here. But there was always a first time for people. After turning into the back of an old, deserted shop, Dark stopped and turned around. He silently counted in his heart, 3, 2, 1. Then a person wearing a squid leather jacket walked out from behind the wall. Dake looked at the person carefully and asked curiously, So you followed me all the way because I like squid? C. Keith's voice became hoarse under the filter of the leather jacket. Damn it, it's not squid, it's squid. Dake shook his head. We're all seafood. Who's worse than who? Let's be direct. Why did you follow me? C. Keith. I didn't follow you. Dake. Question mark. C. Keith. I'm just a squid passing by. Dake. C. Keith. You're the one collecting love divination cards. Chapter 87. Are you talking about the flower cards? Dake reached down and a whole deck of flower cards appeared in his hand. There were a total of 18 flower cards. With a rub of his thumb, they spread out like a folding fan. Each flower card had a different design and was an excellent collector's item. Dake spoke with great familiarity. The bright red camellia represents the most modest love. The devastatingly beautiful beauty you. Even if she burns her own life, she will never leave. The red spider lily at the end of the other shore, in the unseen end, watches the sad love that will never meet again. The beauty of death in such a hopeless situation is truly poignant. And my favorite white devil's snare, with thousands of miles of love. Seeing the flower is like seeing the person. C. Keith listened with a dumbfounded expression. Although the squid skin couldn't show detailed expressions, his astonishment was expressed by the fact that he hadn't moved for a long time. This person, how much research does he have on flower cards? We are the ones who make the flower cards. Why can't I understand what he's saying? And that white devil's snare, why does it look so familiar? Isn't that the one I stuffed under someone's door? https://m. Vipkanchu. VIPC Keat had originally come with the intention of denouncing a punitive expedition. In the last batch of flower cards distributed last week, a large portion of them hadn't been activated. This directly reduced the efficiency of the church's collection of yearning, and caused them to be unable to repair the cracked statue of the goddess. From this, The church noticed that someone was collecting a large number of flower cards. Then, they associated it with the inexplicable crack on the statue of the goddess. They equated the flower card collector with the statue destroyer. Keat was just a pawn who came to investigate. His purpose was to investigate and his mission was to investigate. Once it was confirmed that flower card collector was equal to statue destroyer, the church would give him the necessary punishment for the sake of the goddess. But Keat would never have thought that his disguise would be so clumsy. Speaking of which, who would read the newspaper on the street while leaning against a tree? Wouldn't it be better to spend some money to sit in the restaurant and spy on him? Dake had noticed his stalker not long after he sat down in the restaurant, but he deliberately kept quiet. In short, if he knew what was good for him and left, Dake would pretend that he didn't see anything. But since he didn't leave, he had to get some information out of him. In the end, before he could ask anything, the other party exposed everything with a single sentence. Dake immediately figured out the cause and effect. He even guessed that this was the squid from the Marine Order, the one who transformed Luo Boat into a woman. And the reason why this squid came to find him was that his behavior of collecting flower cards was too blatant. But there was no need to hide it, was there? He was just a pure collector of flower cards. Dake's heart was as clear as a mirror. His praise and fanaticism for the flower cards came from the bottom of his heart without any flaws. Scott had indeed felt that fanaticism, and he had believed him at the first moment. At this point, Keat could actually go back and report back. However, ever since he joined the church, some of the thoughts in his heart became harder and harder to suppress. He wanted to represent the goddess and punish this heretic. Dake said casually, "Excuse me, did you make these flower cards? If possible, I would like to collect some that are not repetitive." Keat's mouth twitched, and he didn't care about anything else. The magic summoner. Oh he. The sudden piercing pain in his buttocks and the sharp laughter behind him caused Keat's heart to be shrouded in a haze in an instant. But in the next moment, his world became completely silent. Whether it was the sharp mocking laughter, the rustling of leaves, or even the seemingly concerned inquiry of the first-year aristocratic student in front of him, none of it entered his ears. He suddenly opened his mouth and angrily rebuked, but he still couldn't make a sound. He didn't know if he couldn't make a sound, or if he simply couldn't hear the sound he made. This was completely different from the silence card that Professor Shi-Erfu was used to using. At least the silence card didn't block one's hearing. Keat, who was filled with endless fear, finally saw the sneak attackers behind him. White and Luo Boat. "It's him, it's him, it's him. I remember now, it's him. I saw a small section of the octopus's tentacle before I fainted. It's the squid, Luo Boat." White helplessly grabbed Luo Boat's arm to prevent him from rushing up and smashing Keat's head in a fit of rage. The little fiend hiding on the eaves had already shut its mouth. It had just injected the silence potion into its syringe, and then used the small dart to throw it at Keat's buttocks, giving them a fatal blow. After the syringe had played its role, it turned into stars and disappeared. Keat didn't see the syringe, only White and Luo Boat, who had just arrived at the scene. White had a naturally sharp intuition, and he had already noticed Keat's strange gaze at the Waltz restaurant. However, after eating the expensive ice cream with Luo Boat, he felt that something was amiss and traced the direction Keat had disappeared in. Thus, in this small area, 4 people from 3 different forces gathered at the same time. Dake calmly looked at the sudden appearance of White and Luo Boat. He didn't think it was a coincidence. After all, the little fiend had already seen their arrival from the roof. Therefore, this was just a foregone conclusion. For example, although White grabbed Luo Boat's right hand, he couldn't grab his left hand at the same time. "In the name of Luo Boat Broheim, come out, Rat-Man Cyborg." Luo Boat summoned his magic guide fairy that he had created during his magic guide lesson. It was an ugly rat that stood on 2 legs and was as tall as a human. It was a remnant of the destroyed Skaven rat empire. It was a robot on the left and a human on the right. It was a rat-man cyborg with an acid spray in its hand. Luo Boat, don't. Seeing the rat-man cyborg summoned by Robert aiming the flamethrower at the squid's face, Victor stopped him with a terrified expression. If they allowed the rat-man cyborg to spray acid on Keat's face, they would definitely be punished or even expelled. St. Mary's clearly forbade fighting, and all disputes were advocated in the form of duels. Because of his duel with Dake last time, he had especially crammed up on the relevant school rules. Generally, the punishment for fighting wasn't heavy. At most, some points would be deducted. But if it caused an injury that was difficult to heal, however, the rat-man cyborg's acid had already corroded Keat's squid skin. Just as Luo Boat wanted to take another step forward, Keat's lips suddenly moved quickly, silently casting a spell. A dark green three-eyed squid turned solid and pounced on the rat-man cyborg at the same time. The two magic guide fairies tangled together. Luo Boat fiercely shook off White. He clenched his fist and rushed forward, punching Keat in the mouth with all his strength. Bang! The typhoon caused a power outage for a period of time. It was a new day, a new day. Chapter 88. The punch was merciless, and almost all of the anger he had been suppressing came pouring out. Keat had never been beaten to such an extent. His mind went blank, and he couldn't use any magic cards. He screamed in pain. Robert was still unwilling to stop. He pounced forward and pushed Scott to the ground. Then, he sat on top of Scott and swung his fist at Scott's face. The leather cover on Keat's face was broken, revealing his mouth and nose. Luo Boat tore the leather cover from bottom to top, and finally saw the man's face. Luo Boat hadn't seen him before because he was a second-year student at the aristocrat house, but that didn't stop him from punching his acne-filled face a few more times. Finally, when Keat's face was bruised and swollen, Luo Boat's anger subsided. He laughed loudly, feeling happier than ever since he'd entered the school. Keat lay on the ground, panting, with tears and snot running down his face. White stared at him from the side. It was the first time he'd seen Luo Boat really hit someone. Remember the URL? Vip Kanchu. 6 after that day, Luo Boat accidentally told White that he'd been kidnapped the whole night, but he didn't tell him that he'd become a woman. White had only just connected the murderer to the cult in the secret room. He was the only one who'd seen Keat wearing the squid leather cover. What do we do now? White asked. Luo Boat sighed and said fiercely, what else can we do? Of course we send him to Professor Shi-Erfu. I'm sure Professor Shi-Erfu will deal with him properly. Don't. Keat, who was playing dead on the ground, immediately screamed. Don't send me to Professor Shi-Erfu. I'll be expelled. And you will also be confined. Luo Boat sneered. Confinement? I'm only here for revenge. How could I be locked up? Well. But White suddenly interrupted. Luo Boat, he's right. You hit him too hard. If Professor Shi-Erfu finds out, not only will he be grounded, but he will also lose at least 50 marks. Luo Boat stared blankly for a moment before crying out. How is that possible? This isn't fair. White shook his head. There's nothing unfair about it. Fighting is wrong. Luo Boat. What about us? White pretended to hesitate and said, Anyway, we've already had our revenge, haven't we? He didn't do anything to you last time, so why don't we just let it go? Luo Boat. But last time. White. Huh. Luo Boat's face fell. Nothing. White continued. Ahem, maybe we can ask Dake. He was here just now. Where's Dake? Dake had already left. As for what White and Luo Boat wanted to do with Keat, that was their own business. However, Dake speculated that White wouldn't want to take Keat to Professor Shi-Erfu. The flower plaque, the statue, the church, these things seemed to be connected. But if you thought about it carefully, you would find that there was a trace of unerasable strangeness. And White was already deeply involved in it. Dake, on the other hand, left after discovering that the statue wasn't anything good. But the main reason why he didn't want to get involved was because of Professor Causaire. As long as one was human, one would be biased when doing things. Night. C. Keat limped into a secret room wearing a repaired leather case. The members of the church sat around him and couldn't help but look at the stitches on his leather case. There were a total of 16 church members present. Apart from the leader who gathered them, no one knew their true identities. From the moment he entered this room, C. Keat was no longer C. Keat, but Cuttlefish. So, what's going on? The one who spoke was their leader. Mr. Hai-Shing. Cuttlefish was too embarrassed to answer the leader's question. Mr. Hai-Shing frowned. I remember telling you to observe first and not make a move. Cuttlefish finally broke down. I really didn't make a move first. Mr. Hai-Shing was puzzled. Could it be that the Valkyrie's son made a move first? He's a treasure in the eyes of the professors and a future star of the Shangmalian. Why would he make a move first? It wasn't them. Cuttlefish cried. It was the Valkyrie's son and his lackeys. I just moved my mouth and they made a move first. Tisk, why is the Valkyrie's son involved again? Mr. Hai-Shing felt a headache coming on. Cuttlefish immediately shifted the blame. I was followed. The person we dealt with that night was the Valkyrie's lackey, Luobot Broheim. They discovered me. Mr. Hai-Shing. How did they discover you? Cuttlefish. I don't know, I really don't know. It's not my fault. Mr. Hai-Shing's headache worsened. Then how did you escape? Cuttlefish. The Valkyrie's son let me go. Mr. Hai-Shing. The Valkyrie's son let you go? All the marine products looked at each other in dismay, unable to understand what was going on. One of them, the eel-headed one and the only female in the church, Miss Hai-Shing, was puzzled. Then is Dake Dimming the person we're looking for? Cuttlefish shook his head. Although I was beaten up, he shouldn't be the one who destroyed the goddess statue. The reason for collecting flower cards might just be a hobby. Miss Hai-Shing. Then who could it be? It can't be the Valkyrie's son, right? Right, what's his name? Pufferfish. I think his name is White God. Mr. Hai-Shing. It's White Gouda. Pufferfish. Exclamation point. Mr. Hai-Shing sighed. We can't cause any more trouble. We don't have much time left. We must repair the statue before the arrival of the holy night, and offer a living sacrifice to revive the goddess during the holy ceremony. Cuttlefish took off his leather case and turned back into C. Keat. He carefully crept into the common room of the aristocrat compound. However, the person he wanted to avoid was drinking tea and reading the newspaper in the common room. Beside him were the two shameless girls. C. Keat turned sideways, trying to avoid being seen as much as possible. However, Dake inadvertently raised his head and met Cuttlefish's gaze. C. Keat suddenly became nervous. It was only when Dake continued to read the newspaper as if nothing had happened that Cuttlefish finally let out a sigh of relief. It seems that Dake Dimming really did leave first during the day. That's why he didn't see my true face under the leather case. C. Keat quickly walked up the stairs. The narrow space of the stairs made him feel much more comfortable. He gently touched the bruises on his face and felt a sharp pain. This made him hate Luobot and White even more. The leader said that we can't cause any trouble before the arrival of the holy night, but on the day of the holy night. Chapter 89. Common Room. Dake put down the newspaper and looked at the information about C. Keat in his notebook. He had a basic understanding of this second-year student. C. Keat was actually quite famous in the second year, even though it was the opposite of him. When they heard that something happened to his family, most of the students were afraid of provoking him, so they didn't mention it. In the end, he was still misunderstood. The students were actually quite helpless. However, it was only the second month of school and their relationship wasn't that good, so they just let him be. In short, everyone had their own way of living. On Sunday, Dake fermented the remaining 3 dried white fruits and blue fruits into juice. He then mixed them and made the energy potion. This way he would have 5 energy potion cards. Remember, https://vipkanchu. VIP. Even though they couldn't use more than 3 cards of the same type in an official duel, there was no such restriction outside of the duel. Dake was already preparing for the masquerade party. Of course, Dake wasn't the only one preparing for the masquerade party. Whether it was for the academic credits, the title of the year's champion, or to attract the attention of the princesses. In short, the first-year students were more serious than ever. People who never went to the library in the past would often go there now. The reading room that always had empty seats was now packed to the brim. It could be said that they were cramming at the last minute or changing for the better. In short, the effects of the masquerade party seemed to be showing. Students at this age needed motivation. During the first class on Monday, Professor Shi Erfu explained the rules of the masquerade party. The specific rules were already logged into the school card and could be checked at any time. Professor Ka Zayer began to make ghosts and monsters. Even Professor Li Li was pulled in to help. As for the first-year students' arithmetic homework, it naturally fell into Dark's hands. It was still more than a week away from Halloween, but it felt like it would be tomorrow. The students talked about Halloween every day. Whether it was makeup, ghosts, academic credits, or princesses, they never got tired of talking about it. And on Wednesday, no one knew who brought it up first. The topic of dance partners had exploded among the first-year students. It was originally a popular topic among the upper-year students. After 3 or 4 days, it finally sank among the first-year students. This seemed to be an opportunity for the little magisters to awaken their awareness of the opposite sex. 2 months after school started, it was also the time for the little magisters to get to know each other. What was moderate? It was a superficial understanding without going deeper. In the world of men and women, the first impression was the most beautiful. A hazy relationship was the most desirable. Once it was too deep, it wouldn't be beautiful. In short, it seemed to have become a trend to send invitations to the opposite sex. Furthermore, there were many ways to invite him. Some people would send a message. Someone would hand over a letter like a confession. There were also people who would meticulously create an invitation to the ball. As the brightest star among the first-year students, Dake Dimming enjoyed almost all kinds of invitations. For example, after the summoning class on Wednesday, someone asked Deanna to send a message, but Dake decisively rejected it. He didn't even know the person's name. Deanna happily sent the message back. When he went out on Thursday morning, he found 3 letters stuffed into the crack of the door. It was 6:15 in the morning. Normally, no one would be earlier than him. Dake didn't ignore the 3 letters or throw them into the trash can. Although it was convenient, it was disrespectful to her. He picked up the 3 letters, opened them in the common room, and replied to them one by one. There was a name on the letter, but there was no room number, so he couldn't return the letters for the time being. Later, he thought about it and entrusted this task to Deanna. Deanna sent the letters back in no time. She even hummed a tune when she came back. After the second class on Thursday morning, Dake was called to the corner of the castle again. A female student from an unknown school held back her shyness and handed him an unusually delicate handmade invitation. He had no choice but to tell her that he already had a dance partner. So on Thursday afternoon, the news that Dake Dimming already had a dance partner spread like the wind throughout the first year. Deanna stayed by his side like a mother hen protecting her young. When people mentioned a dance partner, she couldn't help but hold her head high. So the news that Dake's dance partner was Deanna caught up with the previous news as if it had grown legs. After that, the number of invitations decreased visibly. Dake finally had some peace. The invitations from the first-year students gave him a feeling that they were more formal. Most people's feelings for each other were hazy. There was a strong trace of imitation. Some people even used this as a comparison. It was very immature. In the blink of an eye, it was the last weekend before Halloween. This weekend was the last chance for students who hadn't bought their costumes for the dance. White and Luo Boat were running around, looking for cheap and unique costumes. They seemed to be really enjoying Halloween, picking out the monster costumes that had been forgotten in the corner. And more people, such as Deanna and Luo C, were speeding up the production of magic elf cards. In a short time, more and more people borrowed the laboratory. It was also at this time that the students suddenly realized that the materials provided by Professor Kazair were so expensive. The core materials they prepared themselves were not worth mentioning in front of the value of the materials package. In short, all kinds of problems emerged one after another, and there were even cases of people buying the wrong materials. Every laboratory was a mess. And this weekend, Dake was researching the revealing potion. Since they talked about ghosts, there was no shortage of ghosts. To identify transparent ghosts or other invisible monsters, they needed the revealing potion. In order to research this thing, Dake spent a total of 500 credits in research funds. This was extremely incredible in the eyes of the first-year students at this stage. After all, 4 weeks of normal lectures only cost 480 credits. Dake's final harvest was 3 bottles of revealing potion. One of the bottles failed in the process of making a magic potion card and was consumed. The second bottle was a lucky success. The magic potion card produced was in the form of a prop card. But it was no longer a potion, but a kind of revealing powder card. The need to find the location of the invisible unit was the limitation of the revealing powder. But Dake was already quite satisfied. On Sunday evening, under the afterglow of the setting sun, the blonde boy tasted the unscented black tea as usual and quietly flipped through the books. Another invitation for the masquerade party was sent to him. Chapter 90. Ai Mamotisai rested her chin on her hand as she pulled at the Golden King and the secret treasure book on the table. Her eyes were drifting as she looked to the left. The senior librarian had some sort of relationship with the Duke's son at some point in time. Dake Diming, who used to walk around the counter, would now stop in front of the counter for a minute or two. Ai Ma had heard a lot of rumors about Panduola Doragon. She didn't go out of her way to inquire about it. She just sat in the common room of the Knights Academy and heard rumors about her from time to time. When they talked about her, they always spoke in a tone of reverence and admiration, as if they weren't talking about someone of the same age, but, a goddess. Hitu. Would a goddess shamelessly stick to someone like that? Aima snorted. Dake glanced sideways at the ball invitation that Panduola personally handed to him. He was very curious about where she bought the shell of this thing. The website was https://vipkanchu. Oh, the senior's fingers were really white, and her nails were narrow and long. It felt like they could easily scratch the depths of one's heart. Do you want it? Panduola bent down. Her tight uniform couldn't support her towering figure, which tested one's heart. Her breath carried a hint of fragrance that floated to the tip of one's nose. Dake pushed the invitation back without hesitation. Sorry, I have. You're already so familiar with it. Panduola took the invitation back. In reality, it was just a blank piece of paper. However, her eyebrows drooped slightly, and she squeezed out a trace of disappointment. Her slender fingers quietly pointed at Ai Ma, who was diagonally behind her. Her upper body continued to lean forward as she whispered, "It can't be her, right?" Dake frowned. This was the second time Panduola paired him with Ai Ma. Did the two of them give off such a feeling to outsiders? Panduola's mind was sharp. Her eyes flashed and she said with a smile, "If you have it, we can exchange it," Dake said helplessly. "The theme of Halloween is not a dance party." Panduola. Christmas then. Dake. Huh. In fact, Panduola was only there to suck on her juniors after work to ease her mood. She left the library not long after that. Unlike the calmness of the lower grade students, The upper grade students were actually under a lot of pressure. Moreover, the more outstanding a student was, the more so it was. Schoolwork and competitions were indispensable. Especially since she also had to work as a librarian. She had to manage her time better than her peers. Lady Bella had suggested to her many times that she relinquish this responsibility, but she had always refused without hesitation. When she was in first grade, it was her job as a librarian that had saved her from confusion. Humans should never forget their roots. Once you forget your roots, you will no longer be human. On the way, she thought of her cute junior. Yeah, that feeling of being a little stubborn is pretty good too. Dake Dimming was vexed. He had been forced to agree to the Christmas dance party, although it was one-sided. Even though he didn't care who his Christmas partner would be. He felt like he had lost if it was decided just like that. Thinking about it, he suddenly realized. Could this be the bitterness and melancholy of puberty? Dake quickly threw away his thoughts. Today was the 29th of October. The night after tomorrow was Halloween. The masquerade party is the day after tomorrow. In the corner of the reading room, Victor almost broke his pen in half. In order to create the magic card for the masquerade party, he and Luoboat had been studying here for the entire afternoon, but they were still a mess. The more complicated the magic card creation, the more precise the various data requirements, and the less parts that could be followed. If one wanted to create their own magic card, they had to learn how to calculate. Calculation, arithmetic. Before learning the magic language in second grade, arithmetic class was the biggest nightmare of the little magisters. White's patience was actually pretty good, but he still gradually lost it as the numbers piled up. Just when 90% of his brain was filled with irritation, he saw the moon in the depths of his heart. From one of the entrances of the reading room, he walked into his white moonlight. Unrequited love was a very strange emotion. He was alone, locked in his own world. As long as he did not expose it, it would only get bigger and bigger. White once wanted to use taboo love to check the favorability of his senior Panduola under Luoboat's instigation. But that day, Panduola happened to not be there, so he could not muster up the courage anymore. As long as he did not open his eyes, he would not wake up from his dream. He probably knew that he and his senior were two people on a parallel line. Of course, in his subconscious mind, that was just the current situation. The future would be different. This masquerade party was an opportunity. If he could become the champion of the first grade, he could more or less attract her attention. At that time, White felt that he would be more confident. Maybe he could invite her to dance at the Christmas ball. The Christmas ball was the real ball. What was the Halloween ball? It wasn't until he noticed from afar that Senior Pandora handed an invitation to the dance party to Dark that he suddenly realized what was going on. The Halloween ball was also a ball. Fortunately, Dake did not seem to accept. But was this really a blessing? He did not accept because Dake already had a dance partner. Otherwise, who would refuse Panduola's invitation? Also, when did Dake become so close to Panduola? Crack. The lead of the pencil was poked and broke. I will win. The Shangmalian night sky was still so clear, like a pitch-black mirror that reflected people's hearts, but did not let people see through it. New week. Monday's classes were unstable, and the professors did not want to teach. Tuesday and Wednesday were holidays. But on Tuesday afternoon, all the students were asked to return to the tower dormitory. They could only walk out of the tower at 6 o'clock in the evening. That was when the masquerade party began. There was no opening ceremony. The ghosts and monsters that filled the castle were the best opening ceremony. Ghosts, zombies, mummies, jack pumpkins. When the clock struck 6 o'clock, it was the night of 100 ghosts and monsters. The huge castle was the stage of the students, but also the stage of the ghosts and monsters. The 1,000 students in their costumes. The princess mixed in with a mask. The monsters and monsters dancing wildly in the chaos. Gazing at the ancient castle, the long moon. The fog and the truth always appeared on the chessboard at the same time. Who could find their truth at the ball? Who could dig out the final truth in the chaos? Who could seize the dream in the midst of the revelry? Walking with the brave. Walking with the princess. Walking with the demon god. Let's fool around together. There should be nothing else at night. +3 today before 6 o'clock. If not, it would be +4 tomorrow. You're tuning in to the Whispers of Romance YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.